Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, and we're going to talk about Critical Role campaign. We're going to talk about Critical Role and what's happening in current Critical Role. Specifically, we're going to talk today about the player treatment in Critical Role, player treatment within Critical Role, specifically in campaign. So specifically talking about campaign 3, episode 1. Okay, and I'll give you the cool part first, right? What are we talking about here? Let's get it all the way through. Here we go. It is my contention that Critical Role. I'm watching Critical Role carefully right now, and I'm catching up and getting and making sure that I understand what's happened in every campaign of Critical Role, because with the launch of campaign 3, for Critical Role has reached a point of critical importance, and that importance is Critical Role is now deeply tied to Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, the current version of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, and the public, I think public perception is that Critical Role is Dungeons & Dragons. And this can't be ignored by any Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition Dungeon Master, because there is a distinct belief. Essentially, you have to understand that Critical Role is impacting your game, right? And we have to understand Critical Role as Dungeon Masters. So I don't think that Critical Role is actually playing Dungeons & Dragons. This is my supposition, Scott Garibay. In my humble opinion, Critical Role does not play Dungeons & Dragons, and I'll give you proof of that today. I'm gonna present my evidence that Critical Role is not playing Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, okay, or any edition of Dungeons & Dragons for that matter, and that So what are they doing? It's kind of an interesting question, right? What the heck what's happening, right, with Critical Role? Well, here we go. Critical Role is really the Matthew Mercer experience. Matthew Mercer is a unique dungeon master. There's never been a dungeon master like him on the planet. There is no one who has made $20 million, right? Who has raised $20 million based on their name being next to Dungeons & Dragons. Nobody has ever even remotely landed with that level of success. It is just the amount of success that Matthew Mercer has produced from being adjacent to Dungeons & Dragons is staggering and is absolutely unequaled by any other human on the planet, right? So Matthew Mercer, I am saying that what Critical Role is doing is the Matthew Mercer experience. And get this is important. The Matthew Mercer experience is indistinguishable from Dungeons & Dragons for anyone who's ever played 2+ editions of Dungeons & Dragons. So if you have played 0 editions of Dungeons & Dragons, or if you have played 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, you will think that the Matthew Mercer experience is actually Dungeons & Dragons. That what Critical Role is doing is Dungeons & Dragons. I don't believe it's even remotely Dungeons & Dragons, and the reason why is no Dungeons & Dragons Dungeon Master would ever subject their players to what Matthew Mercer is doing, okay? So, let's get it all the way there. Let me present my evidence, right? So I'm saying that Critical Role is not playing Dungeons & Dragons. What they're doing is they're putting forward the Matthew Mercer experience. The Matthew Mercer experience is indistinguishable from Dungeons & Dragons by anybody who's played 5th edition and any other edition of Dungeons & Dragons would understand that what he's doing is definitely not Dungeons & Dragons, and that the Matthew Mercer experience for anybody who's never played Dungeons & Dragons or has only played Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition definitely would, like, the Matthew Mercer experience is indistinguishable for them from Dungeons & Dragons. Here's my evidence. All right, okay. So what's my evidence of this? Well, I'm going to give it to you right now. Let me give you the facts. Let me give you the numbers, okay? Critical Role, Campaign 3, Episode 1, all right? Minute 0. At minute 0 of the game starting, okay? At minute 0 of the game starting, there are 2 players, right? Actually, Actually, so here's what happened. There, at minute 0, there are 8 players. Matthew Mercer immediately dismisses 6 players, right? Now, first of all, I'll tell you right now, if you have 8 players in your Dungeons & Dragons game and you dismiss 6 of your players at the beginning of the game, that right there is it's repugnant behavior for any actual Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition Dungeon Master. It's very, very offensive, right? You're saying, hey, thanks for coming to my game. You can go kick rocks. Beat it. You're out. I'm going to pay attention to these people right here. And let's not even talk about the fact that one of the people who gets to stay in round 1 is his own wife, and one of the people who gets to stay in round 1 is the wife of the CEO of Critical Role. That seems highly problematic, right? Like, but yeah, all right, let's keep going, right? All right, so from there, right? It really, like, you're just like, what am I seeing? Like this, it's hard to even imagine what's happening when all this is going on, right? So he opens his game by dismissing 75% of the players, right? No actual 5th edition Dungeon Master would start a campaign and say, hey, you're an important player, and I'm so thankful for you coming out to this campaign, and you can go kick rocks and get in. I don't know where you're going to go, but you can't be here at the table. Like, literally in minute 1. You're like, this is insane. It doesn't stop there, right? Let's keep going and see where this lands. You're just like, are you kidding me? Is this actually happening? Right? So then 2 players are on the board for 40 minutes. 40 minutes. Then 2 more players of the 8 are brought in. They are there from minute 40 to minute 65. Okay? Incredible. And when those 2 new players are brought in, the other 2 players are kept at the table but not really interacting at all, right? So now you're 65 minutes into the game, and only half of the players have even been given any attention or any time whatsoever, right? Then 3 more players are brought into the game, and this goes on for another 55 minutes, and the entire table, okay, all players are only at the table and allowed to actually roll dice and play at the 2 hour and 5 minute mark. This is absolutely repugnant, offensive behavior that any actual 5th edition Dungeon Master would never, ever, ever be able to get away with this, right? And the reason why is, if you were invited to a game and you were told to excuse yourself and come in at the 2 hour and 5 minute mark in a Dungeons & Dragons game, you would never play in that game again, right? The idea that somebody would be kept away from the table for an amount of time that is longer than most movies is completely unrealistic in any Dungeons & Dragons game anywhere for 5th edition. You would never, ever, ever get away with this. So how is Matthew Mercer getting away with this? Well, he doesn't actually have players. He has employees, right? And you absolutely can say, hey, you're an employee. You're going to sit around and do nothing for 2 hours. And you're like, am I going to sit around and do nothing for 2 hours? I don't want to do that. Oh, wait, I'm being paid. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine, right? So what you're looking at is you're looking at a dungeon master who doesn't have players but has employees, right? And that's the only way you could ever possibly get away with what he's doing, right? And now, does that mean that what's happening on Critical Role is terrible? No. The reality is we have to pay close attention to it, right? And the reason why is it's not their fault that anyone who's ever played played Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition and one other tabletop role-playing game, one other edition of Dungeons & Dragons, they would immediately recognize this. If they had either been a player or a dungeon master, they're like, this isn't Dungeons & Dragons. This is a Matthew Mercer experience that is indistinguishable from Dungeons & Dragons by people who have played 0 editions of Dungeons & Dragons or maybe 5th edition of Dungeons & Dragons, right? If they're like a critter, right? So the reality is vast majority of Dungeons & Dragons players would realize that what Matthew Mercer is doing is utterly repugnant and offensive behavior to any player. No dungeon master would be say, thanks for showing up to this place, thanks for having your books, thanks for having your dice, thanks for being ready. Now you can go kick rocks for 2 hours and 5 minutes. So no dungeon master in the world would ever do this. It is absolutely unacceptable, right? Now, the moment you understand that the people who are at the table with Matthew Mercer are not players, but are actually employees, in my humble opinion, then everything makes sense, right? Because, like, an employer saying, hey, go kick rocks for two hours and do nothing, you're going to get paid for all of it. Yeah, that's fine. That's totally acceptable, right? Because the expectations of an employee to an employee, an employer to an employee, are drastically different than the expectations of a dungeon master to a player, right? So that's the issue. So it is my contention. Critical Role is 100% absolutely not Dungeons & Dragons. It's a Matthew Mercer experience, which is indistinguishable from people who have never played Dungeons & Dragons or people who have only ever seen 5th edition, all right? So for inexperienced players, inexperienced dungeon masters, or literally people who are not dungeon masters or dungeon players, this absolutely would look indistinguishable with Dungeons & Dragons. But any actual dungeon master would understand, no, you cannot possibly treat players like this. This is outrageous behavior and completely unacceptable, right? So all that is my opinion. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think what's happening on Critical Role is actually a Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition game? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.